Chapter 21, Goron with the Sunset Hair. The Legend of Sunset Shimmer, Majora's Mask. By Ganondorf 8. August 15, 2016. Chapter 21, Goron with the Sunset Hair. I was stuck with a difficult decision to make. On the one hand, Magpie wanted me to follow her all the way back to where she was buried. While I was curious as to what her grave looked like, the fact that it meant traversing back through some rather difficult terrain was something I'd rather not do. On the other hand, I could just ask her to tell me what happened right here in Goron village without having to go gallivanting off like she wanted. I thought about asking Twilight for her opinion, but Maud quickly came to a stop and turned around. Was she annoyed at how I was just standing there? I actually couldn't tell because her emotionless face made it hard to figure out which emotion she was using.
Why are you standing there? I told you that we must go to where my people buried me.
Magpie said.
I just don't see the point of dragging me back to your grave. Why not just tell me what you want from me here? It would save us both plenty of time, something your people are currently lacking right now.
I said. Maud floated there without saying a word for a few moments, and I thought I had somehow offended her with my remark. My next thought was that she was going to possess me or whatever it was that ghosts did, but she just floated in place without displaying a single emotion.
Is something wrong? If you are to help me, as the one on the flying bird says, you must come to my grave. That doesn't answer my question. I am sorry, but there is no time for me to answer anything. Well, then I'm sorry, but I'm not able to help you unless you can give me some leeway here.
I said. It felt strange conversing with Magpie despite being a ghost. Whenever I had the pleasure of her company back home, she was always difficult to approach. I mean, she wasn't impossible to talk to. She just had a strange way of expressing her feelings. How Pinkie Pie was able to understand her older sister's mannerisms continues to baffle me, but there was a sisterly bond between them that the rest of us couldn't fathom. If I could describe Maud in a single word, it would be eccentric. Unlike other people who live in the world that I now called home, Maud was the only one I knew who had a rock as a pet. Bizarre? Probably, but it made her happy and, in turn, made Pinkie happy. In this scenario, Maud's stoic personality was at the forefront, yet I doubted she understood where I was coming from. As we continued to stare at each other, I could feel the cold air beginning to grow stronger. It made me fold my arms in an attempt to keep warm, and that meant I needed to get into some place warm or else come down with a nasty case of pneumonia.
I haven't been fair with you.
Hey. I didn't expect Maud to say something like that. I knew she was difficult to understand, but that took the cake.
The reason why we must go to my grave is because that is where I shall finally return to this mortal coil. I have been waiting here for the one to come along who can allow me to come back to life and finish what I had started.
Magpie said.
Is that true? Yes. I have no reason to lie to you. Then why didn't you say that? I don't quite follow your logic. I assumed you would understand my reason and choose to follow me without any questions. Perhaps I was not clear with my intentions and I apologize for being confusing. The one who rides the giant bird says that you possess a power that no one else has. If it is a power that can help me regain my life, then I will do whatever is necessary to be able to achieve my goal.
Magpie answered.
Did he say what that power was? No, but I would learn when the time came. Are we finished with this conversation now? I know you want to get out of this weather, yet I wish for you to follow me to where my people buried me. From my position, you do not have much of an option. Please do not view my words as a threat. You have questions and I have the answers.
Magpie answered. She then turned around and began to float away from me before tilting her head around slightly.
Follow me to my grave and everything will become clear. The journey will take us to the highest point in Snowhead.
Before I could get in a word edgewise, Maud resumed floating away. I didn't know what to think of what just happened. The option of her explaining everything to me right here had been cast aside by the cold wind, and now I found myself forced to follow her until we reached her grave. If it was located where she said it was, I hoped that my body would last long enough in this accursed weather. Flash sentry? What had he gone and said about me to Maud before I arrived in the village? I could have easily explained things to her without him making some kind of wild statement. Knowing that there wasn't anything else I could do, I sighed and began to follow after Maud, who appeared to be taking a more roundabout route. Even though I could use the lens of truth to follow her ghostly form directly, that would just be a waste of my magic, and I had a feeling I was going to be needing plenty of it in the upcoming trials. Since her shadow was still plainly visible, I could just follow it and use the lens every now and then in case she wanted to say something. As I walked back around the building, making sure not to run in case I slipped on the ice again, Twilight floated down and landed on my shoulder before grabbing the collar and sliding underneath it. Maybe she wasn't as immune to the cold as she previously thought.
Sunset? Did you hear what Maud said?
Twilight asked.
She didn't really give a good reason as to why we have to follow her. Yes, that's true, but that wasn't what I was getting at. She believes that you have the ability to bring her back to life, and I think she's expecting you to use your magic. Doesn't she know that you don't have the ability to resurrect the dead?
Twilight asked.
No one in Equestria could do that. Whatever happened that caused her death hasn't obviously settled well with her. Her home is on the verge of succumbing to a freak snowstorm, Twilight. In her defense, Maud is willing to do whatever it takes to come back to life and save her people by going to the temple. But, we both know that what she wants is wishful thinking, and that nothing can bring her back.
I said.
Maybe we should tell her. I doubt she'd listen.
If there was one thing I knew about the Gorons of Termina that was the same as the Gorons of Hyrule, was that they were very stubborn. As a proud rock people, they didn't like to be proven wrong about anything. In her head, Maud believed I could use my powers to revive her, and nothing anyone says would change her opinion. There was a sense of dread that filled my heart. I knew she wasn't going to like what I would tell her when we reach her grave. Despite being a ghost, Maud was surprisingly fast. I assumed she wanted to reach her grave as quickly as possible, and I found it difficult to keep up with her. The pathway she took to reach the entrance of Goron College involved getting past a couple of blue Tektites who had decided to make the path their territory. One hit from them would have meant falling back down and having to run all the way up again. Fortunately, I had improved on my dodging and both monsters slid past me when they attempted to attack. Of course, Maud didn't even notice given that nothing would affect her corporeal body. I took the time to get a better look at Goron Village just to get myself familiar with the layout in case I had to come back later. Much of the village was surrounded by walls of solid rock, yet there was a cave entrance in the easternmost section. It was covered by an ice chunk, so that meant using hot spring water would melt it away quickly. The entrance was actually quite large, as though something big could live in there. Aside from that and the mentioning of the Goron Shrine by Diamond Tiara, there wasn't really that much else around here. It actually felt disappointing knowing that the Gorons had to endure in such conditions whether there was any snow or not. By the time I reached the entrance to the village, Maud's shadow had stopped moving, indicating that she needed to speak to me about something. I raised the lens of truth to my eyes and peered through it to see her ghostly form suddenly appear before me.
I noticed that you were looking around my village,
Maud Pai said.
I wanted to be familiar with it. You seem bored. Compared to the likes of Clock Town, Goron Village is lacking. My village may not have the same appeal, but it is the only place my people have ever known. Generations ago, we Gorons came to these mountains from beyond this land, and settled when they realized that they could carve out a worthwhile existence. They worked really hard to get everything the way it is,
Maud Pai said.
What about that cave down at the bottom? That is where Medigoron lives. He was too big to fit in the Goron Shrine, so he carved out that cave with his hands. He has very powerful hands. He created something special only Gorons who have proven themselves can use,
Maud Pai answered. I was expecting her to give me a little more information, but she had the same mentality about revealing information to outsiders like Diamond Tiara. I thought about inquiring a little further without making my intentions known, yet Maud chose to continue guiding me, ending the conversation before I could say anything else. In the next area, which was where I encountered Pinky, Maud had stopped by the wooden bridge that connected to the island.
You look like you are upset with something. I wanted to know more about what Medigoron makes. Only Gorons are allowed to know that. That's what Diamond Tiara said. I don't know who that is. Never mind. While my people like to keep some things about us to ourselves, there is one thing I can tell you about. Have you heard of the Goron races?
Maud Pai asked. I shook my head, yet she didn't seem surprised by my response. Most people who were able to express their feelings would have been shocked, but she simply stared at me with that blank look that was slowly becoming a normality for her.
Gorons race there to be the fastest.
She then looked down at her legs and looked at my legs before dropping her head slightly. If I didn't know any better, I could have sworn I heard her crying softly so that I couldn't hear it.
I used to be the fastest among my people. Everyone went there to either race or watch to see who amongst them would become the champion. Why were you looking at my legs? Was I being offensive? No, not really. I don't understand. You seem disappointed. I guess that I just haven't gotten used to the fact that I no longer have my proper legs.
Maud Pie said. I looked down at her legs again and realized that they ended in short nubs compared to what Gorons usually had. Was this because she was a ghost?
Whenever I competed in the Goron races, no one was ever able to beat me. I was the best. The others admired me for my skill even though deep down they wanted to beat me. The elder's son was my biggest fan. He loved seeing me roll along at intense speeds, pushing my way through using magic, and winning the prize every year.
Maud then noticed my blank expression, and took her a few moments to realize that I had no idea what she was talking about.
Sorry. I got carried away with my memories. Do you miss those days? Yes, but I will get new ones when you have revived me.
Maud Pie answered. She truly believed that she could be brought back to life. I was a magical prodigy not to the same extent as Her Highness given that I abandoned my studies but not even I could perform such a miracle as resurrecting the dead. I really wanted to tell her the truth, but I knew she wouldn't listen to me, maybe not right now but perhaps later. Maud continued to float along past Pinky, and I followed after her making sure to avoid the ice chunk that covered the hole in the ground. The instant I walked past Pinky, however, a howling sound broke the eerie silence of the area. At first I thought it was coming from behind me, but then I looked down and saw a white beast running around on the frozen lake, struggling to climb up to where I was. It must have had sharp claws to avoid slipping on the ice. I could have sworn that I had seen it somewhere before, but my mind was running a blank, yet Twilight knew what it was immediately.
A white wolfos. Can't say I'm surprised to see one around here.
Twilight said.
What makes you say that? They live in cold regions by hiding in plain sight by pretending to be flat, but then suddenly spring up and attack whenever something gets near them. I know it sounds silly to hear me say it like that, Sunset, but that is what they really do. Most of the time, they dart about waiting for the perfect opportunity to get close, but if you try to attack them, they jump back and continue darting back and forth. Despite having sharp claws, white wolfos don't really inflict that much damage.
Twilight answered.
Now I remember. Remember what? I encountered one of these back in Hyrule, but I only ever saw the one, or maybe I saw a second one somewhere. In any case, I don't recall how you go about beating them, so perhaps you can remind me. After all, you are my fairy partner and your knowledge is second to none.
I answered.
No need to flatter me, Sunset. But I do appreciate the comment. Anyway, when a white wolfos attacks up close, it will turn its back towards you. That's when you can strike it from behind and take it down in just one hit. Why it does this maneuver is beyond me, but you shouldn't hesitate as it could mean the difference between life and death.
Twilight said. The creature looked rather pitiful from where I was standing, but I wasn't about to start mocking it. Monsters in these games had a nasty habit of suddenly doing something that went against their programming, and I wasn't about to see what this thing would do. Turning my attention back to Maud, she had since continued on and probably didn't even notice that I wasn't following her. Knowing that I needed to conserve my magic, I stopped using the lens of truth and followed her shadow, making sure not to fall down to the frozen lake below. The white wolfos wasn't an actual threat, but fighting it would only slow me down and I needed all the time I could muster given that I still had 3 days. Running across the second bridge, my heart began to beat faster when the howls of a second white wolfos echoed around me. Unlike the first one that popped up on the frozen lake, this one appeared right in front of me as though it were guarding the final bridge. I drew my sword and prepared to fight, but then it suddenly got pushed aside by an unseen force, tumbling down the slope and onto the lake. Using the lens again, I noticed Maud was standing where the monster had stood, yet she simply stared at me with her emotionless expression. I had a feeling she just saved me some time, but how was she able to push it away when she wasn't capable of touching anything? Ghosts can't touch physical objects as far as I was aware, but perhaps the white wolfos had some ghost-like qualities as well?
We need to keep moving. How did you do that? Those beasts are afraid of anything that's stronger than them. That doesn't make any sense. I would like us to keep going if that's okay.
Maud Pie said. She then looked up at a large boulder on top of a ledge that could only be reached by walking up a steep slope, and reached out with her hand like she wanted to go there, but quickly dropped it. I could see her clench that same hand into a fist, but she quickly changed her tone upon noticing me looking at her actions. Perhaps Maud was realizing that she couldn't be revived from the dead.
The entrance to the Goron racetrack is blocked. Is that a problem? If spring were here, everyone would be up there preparing to see a great race. The snow is preventing the race from happening, but that boulder is also a problem. If only there were some way of shattering it to pieces.
Maud Pie answered. Again, was she beginning to realize that she was permanently dead?
Once you bring me back to life, I can shatter that boulder with just one punch. Gorons who win the races are rewarded with a special material that is desired by the smithy who lives in the mountain village. I don't get why he wants it so much. Our prize is not worth anything really.
That was something I needed to remember, as I had every intention of paying another visit to Fancy Pants' entire rack once I had gotten my hands on hot spring water.
We need to continue onward. The place my people buried me is not very far now.
Maud Pie then continued onward, prompting me to follow along.
Twilight. What is it?
Twilight asked.
I think Maud is starting to realize that coming back to life isn't going to happen. Yes, she does seem to be having some internal conflict, but why not just tell her that you can't bring her back? I just don't have the heart to tell her. If I suddenly said that I couldn't fulfill her wishes, it'd make me out to be the bad guy. You, more than anyone else, knows that I don't want to ever go back to those troubled days. I've worked really hard to get away from my old life, and to go back to it would just destroy what confidence I have in myself.
I answered. Twilight looked at me for a few seconds with a surprised look, but then she nuzzled up next to my face. I knew Her Highness understood. She was the one who gave me a second chance where the others chose instead to scorn me.
Maud will realize that nothing in this world can revive her and accept what fate has dealt her. A harsh way to look at it, but nothing I don't disagree with. I do wonder what Flash Senti said to her before we got to Goron village. That's something we may never know.
As I entered the mountain village, Maud's shadow continued moving, although she was heading more towards the right. If I recalled what I saw when I first came here, there was a small pond that featured several chunks of ice. Could her grave be located nearby? As I thought about where the Gorons could have buried her, her shadow suddenly began getting smaller. I quickly used the lens of truth and saw that she began to fly upwards, but that actually wasn't the worst thing. No, that honor went to a massive climbing section. The entire mountainside was covered with a ladder that split into different directions. Some paths lead to dead ends, while a main path the very top of the mountain. Thinking that climbing while using the lens of truth would only waste my magic, I put it in my pocket and came to a realization. The ladder disappeared the instant the lens was no longer shining on it.
Did that ladder just disappear? It does seem to be that way, Sunset. How did the Gorons manage to climb up that? I don't think they did. Remember what we learned from Pinkie Pie? There was a tunnel that they used to get to the top of this mountain, but the cold weather has covered up the entrance with thick snow. I'm guessing this is how you have to get up to her grave.
Twilight answered.
That means I need to consume a lot of magic. Considering that you used quite a bit upon acquiring the lens of truth, I'm not sure if you have enough to make it to the top. I know that Adagio gave you an increase in magic when you returned the stray fairies to the fairy fountain in Woodfall, but you haven't picked up any magic jars lately. If you ran out of magic during your climb and somehow slipped, you would fall straight down to your death.
Twilight said. Her words were horrible in nature to think about, but she wasn't trying to hide the truth from me. Unlike the actual hero who most likely had numerous lives despite getting killed, video game logic at its best, I only had the one life. If I lose that life, my world would never go back to the way it was. There was only one option to take. I needed to collect some magic jars to restore my magic. Having my equestrian magic would have made this a moot point, but Termina prevented me from using it, and that meant smashing jars scattered across the land. The only problem was that there were no jars, considering I was out in the middle of nowhere. To find pots meant going all the way back to Clock Town. I could save time by warping there using that song Flash gave me, the Song of Soaring, but even then time was precious.
Gah!
I shouted, stomping my foot on the snow.
What's wrong? I'm just frustrated knowing that my own natural magic has been suppressed. You do know that you shouldn't rely on it too much, right? I know, but still. There's not much you can do about it, Sunset. You need to collect some magic jars to replenish your magic power. Now, what exactly do you have to do in order to restore it? I assume that asking a dojo is out of the question seeing as both great fairies you've saved have now been shattered thanks to resetting time.
Twilight said. I then told her about pots and how I needed to smash them in order to get whatever was hiding in them. Upon hearing that I had to resort to cheap vandalism, Her Highness scoffed at me before looking directly in my eyes with a sharp gaze.
You're kidding me, right? Tell me you're kidding me, Sunset. It's a mechanic I learned from my previous journey. Whoever came up with the idea must have had some twisted desire or something. In any case, there aren't any pots for you to smash around here, but maybe you can break those small mountains of snow we've been seeing all over the place.
Twilight suggested. The idea of picking up snow with my hands wasn't to my liking. It was cold and I didn't want to get frostbite on my hands, but Twilight's suggestion was pretty sound, especially since it didn't mean having to waste time going somewhere else. I decided to walk towards the mountain smithy as I remembered seeing a lot of small snow mounds nearby. Whenever I ran into one, I picked it up, tossed it, and waited to see what would come out upon it breaking on impact with the ground. My first few attempts resulted in some rupees wealth. Wasn't what I needed at that point, but then the next one produced a small magic jar. One of those would only restore a small amount of magic compared to the big jar that restored a lot in one go. Knowing there was no reason to be choosy, I picked it up and continued smashing the snow mounds in hopes of getting what I needed. Upon smashing my 20th mound, I was just about to grab what had been just my third small magic jar. They proved to be elusive when a voice suddenly called out from out of nowhere, causing me to jump slightly.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Twilight? Did you hear that? I did, but where did it come from? No clue. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
The voice called out a second time. Again, neither Twilight nor I knew where it was coming from, so we began looking around to see who or what was calling. I actually thought it was Fancy Pants, but then he didn't seem like the kind of person who would call out like that. He wouldn't come outside where it was cold either, so it had to have been someone else. Who in their right mind would be out here in such harsh weather?
Hey! Can anyone hear me? Where are you?
I asked, cupping my hands together so that my voice could echo.
Up here. Up here. I'm up here. That doesn't exactly give me much to go on. Look on top of this ledge. I am standing right here and shivering to death.
There were a lot of ledges that jutted out across the mountain village, so there was no telling which one this mysterious person was calling out from. There was something about the accent that felt familiar, but that wasn't important so as to finding where they were. That's when Twilight came up with an idea. She decided to fly into the air in hopes of seeing if she could find whoever was calling for help. I told her to be careful in case the one connected to the voice was only pretending to help and was in fact a monster that wanted to eat her or something. Her Highness floated upward and began scanning about to see if anything looked suspicious while I looked on. It didn't take long for her to notice a Goron wearing a strange hat was shivering on a ledge that was right above where I was standing. She floated back down and informed me of what she saw, and I was shocked that someone was trapped. I walked forward a few feet before turning around and noticing the ledge in question. It wasn't so much a ledge jutting out from the mountain but rather a raised frozen platform that must have formed when the cold weather initially began. Judging from how far from the ground the ledge was, whoever was up there could easily jump down to the ground without sustaining any kind of injury.
How did you get up there?
I called out.
I've got no idea, but I need help. Can't you jump down? It's not that big of a drop, so I'm sure you'll be fine. I'm too cold and weak to make such an attempt. Are you able to at least inch yourself towards the edge? I'd like to be able to see you so that I can talk to you better.
I said. At first, the mysterious person didn't say anything and I assumed they weren't even able to do that, but then I heard shuffling coming from the ledge. A few moments later and a Goron's head poked out in front of the ledge, resulting in dropped jaws from both myself and Twilight. We recognized who this Goron was. It was Photo Finish, the student from Canterlot High who loved taking photos using that old-fashioned camera of hers. I should have known it was her based on the accent. She definitely looked unusual as a Goron given how plump they were, but it was her hairstyle and flashy sunglasses that made her distinguished. She was also wearing her usual attire, but it was the mask on her head that struck me as the most important thing. Since I already collected a few masks, I needed to get my hands on the one Photo Finish had, but within good reasons of course.
A human? I was expecting the fellow Goron, but perhaps you might do.
Photo Finish said.
Did you say something about being cold? Yes. I am. Freezing up here. I'm also very hungry. I haven't eaten anything in so long, I feel like I will pass out. What if I find you some food? You? No offense, but I don't think a human can find what I crave.
Photo finish answered. She then began to wobble about for a few moments before falling over and landing with a loud thud on the ledge. Just hearing that sound made me want to laugh, but I withheld in case my actions offended her.
Ooh. I'm so hungry that I can't even stand up properly. I really need something in me and soon.
She climbed back onto her feet and shuffled over to the edge again and looked down at me, desperation protruding from her face.
Maybe you can help me after all. I mean, I doubt you'll succeed, but at this point I'll do anything before I go. Go? You're not going anywhere. You do not understand my meaning? Gah. I'm surprised a little schnitzel like you can't grasp the obvious. I am not long for this world. I doubt that I will be able to last much longer what with this cold weather freezing me, but perhaps one last meal is all I need to quietly drift away to that big sleep where you never wake up again.
Photo finish said. Had she been up there so long, she had gotten delusional about surviving? Or perhaps she was being serious and death was looming over her.
I just want to eat once more before I die up here even if it isn't that big of a meal. Something tough and hard to chew. I cannot forget that flavor. And where am I supposed to get that? My village is sure to have the food that I crave, but you may be hard-pressed to find someone willing to give it to you. Because of how cold it's gotten, most Gorons have either hidden their food to prevent others from stealing it or simply don't have enough for themselves.
Photo finish answered.
I'll see what I can do. If you can bring me what I desire, then I'll give you this mask I'm wearing on my head. I know it's not exactly a wonderful item, but I'm sure a human such as yourself can get some good use out of it. Now go. Leave me and do not return without my final meal.
Photo finish said. She may have thought the mask she wore wasn't very important, but it was something that I really needed, and now I had a valid reason as to how I could get it. Turning around, I began to walk over to the small pond, but then I began to think about how I was going to get her a meal. Going back to Goron village was easy, but going inside the Goron shrine where they resided would prove difficult. Diamond Tiara may or may not be willing to let me inside given how she viewed me, but perhaps she might be willing to change her mind should I tell her one of her own is in dire need of food and is likely to die. The first thing that needed to be done was figure out what Magpie wanted from me. I mean, I knew she wanted me to use magic, but that wasn't going to happen no matter how much she talked about it. Perhaps there was something else that I had to do for her? All manner of thoughts began flashing in my mind as to what she would ask of me. Sighing, I kept going until I reached the pond. A sign nearby stated that it was deep and that Gorons shouldn't play near it. Were they unable to swim? I supposed it did make sense given how bulky they were compared to humans and Deku scrubs. It also explained why they needed to use that tunnel. Several chunks of ice bobbed up and down in the water, and it was obvious that I needed to use them to make my way across. I needed to time things just right, otherwise I would end up experiencing a cold swim that I would rather not have.
You had better be careful here,
Twilight said.
I'm not a Goron, so I'm not going to drown. That's not what I meant. Don't worry, Twilight. I happen to be a very good swimmer, as you've already seen. A little cold water isn't going to cause any harm. That's where you're wrong, Sunset. The water is much colder than you think. If you were to swim about in it, your strength and eventually your life force will drain away until you perish. Those ice chunks will be slippery, obviously, so take your time here,
Twilight said. Now that she mentioned it, I could sense a cold vapor wafting up from the water below. In any case, I couldn't allow myself to be discouraged. I had to keep on going no matter what trials were waiting for me, although having some kind of cheat would be practical. I steeled myself and jumped onto the first ice chunk, causing it to wobble slightly due to my weight being applied to it. Fortunately, there was only one more ice chunk to jump onto, so at least this wasn't going to take very long. No, what would take a lot of time was the daunting task that laid ahead of me in the form of the large mountain. I had to climb up what could be several thousand feet. Sometimes, I wished that I wasn't the one who had to go through all this. I've had experiences like this back in Equestria, but that was when I had magic along with 4 hooves with which to gallop along at an incredible pace. But, it was destiny, maybe fate, that placed this burden on me, so who was I to go against it? Jumping onto the second chunk and nearly slipping into the water, I jumped again and landed on the other side before looking straight up. The mountain disappeared into the thick clouds that swirled above, but that was the least of my worries. My concern involved running out of oxygen in case the air up there was too thin for me.
Guess it's time for me to start climbing, hey. Do you think you got enough magic jars? I'm not sure, but I can't put it off any longer. To be frank, I don't know how I'll be able to climb and hold the lens of truth at the same time. Yes, that is a problem and one we didn't consider. Could you hold it for me? Me? I'm a fairy. I don't think fairies are capable of holding anything bigger than a thimble. But, what if you tied some string around the hilt of the lens, place it around your neck like a necklace, and allow me to hold onto it that way? I should be able to do that while you bear the brunt of the weight.
Twilight answered. I knew Her Highness was right about being too small to hold anything, but did she have to make herself appear completely helpless? Also, where was I going to find some loose string in the middle of nowhere? My pockets can carry a lot of things, yet string wasn't one of them.
Where am I supposed to get some string? Pull off a piece from your hat, tunic, or even your boots. Not too much though, as that would cause it to unravel, and I don't think you want to walk around in the cold if your tunic ends up that way.
Twilight answered. It sounded like a really good plan until I addressed one little snag to Her Highness. Such string on my clothes had most likely become brittle by that point, so any attempt at trying to pull a piece off would result in it being frozen and prone to snapping like a twig. No, I believed the direct approach was necessary. I had to climb with the lens in my hand. Our little conversation had essentially amounted to nothing. As soon as I took out the lens, raised it to my eye and started climbing, Twilight protested against my decision.
What are you doing? Climbing and using the lens. Didn't you want to consider an alternative option? I did, but then I figured I should just go with it.
I answered. Despite Twilight's protests, I started climbing up the ladder, making sure to constantly look upward to make sure I was going on the right path. Right off the bat, the cold wind began howling, but I knew that I had to remain strong as I climbed upwards towards the top. As soon as I climbed a short distance, the ladder split into two directions, but I could see that the path to the right led to the next section. Inching over proved a little difficult given I had only one hand to use along with my feet, but I managed to shift over and climb further upwards. It then made me start to think. Who built this long ladder in the first place? It couldn't have been the Gorons, as I doubted they were capable of climbing ladders, what with their short stubby arms and legs. Could it have been humans who came to settle down in Snowhead long ago? Also, why make them invisible aside from those who possessed the one item that could see the truth? It was questions like those and many more that continued haunting my mind because they could prove essential in figuring out how to progress further. I knew what needed to be done to save this world, but the little things weren't meant to be ignored. A short while later, my arm started to get tired. It was supporting the entire weight of my body, yet I wasn't even halfway up. Falling off at that point would have meant instant death, so how could I continue going? Maybe I should have paid counsel to what Her Highness suggested instead of thinking I could do it on my own as is. I reached out to grab the ladder but lost my grip and wound up dangling from the ladder. Thank goodness my legs hadn't gotten tired, although this position was putting a lot of pressure on them and my arms flailing about.
Sunset. This is a lot more painful than it looks. Drop the lens of truth. Are you kidding? You need both hands to grab onto the ladder and with one being used to hold that lens. I'm going to have to stop you right there, Twilight. I know what you're saying is sound advice given my predicament, but throwing away an essential item is something I can't consider for even a moment. I have a feeling I'll be needing the lens throughout the duration of our time here. I'll just find a way to make this work,
I said. It was easier said than done. Not only were my legs experiencing agony, but my back was beginning to feel incredible pressure. I couldn't stay in this position for much longer. I did consider sliding my legs out, fall, and hopefully grab onto the ladder instead of crashing into the snow below, but I doubted my reaction would be fast enough. Twilight's fluttering about didn't make things any easier given she continued insisting that I throw the lens away in order to save myself. That's when an idea struck me. Despite the mountain being made of rock, the outer layer was snow that had frozen over, especially in these higher altitudes. What if I thrust the lens into the side of the mountain like a marker, then use my free hand to regain my balance? It sounded crazy, but then it was my best and arguably only option. Without a moment's notice, I plunged the lens into the side of the mountain where it stuck in place, although it did slip a little. Then I lifted myself up and tried to grab the now invisible ladder with my hand. When it was apparent that I couldn't recall where I needed to grab, I flailed about again until my hand clasped onto the ladder through sheer coincidence. I then began to relax and breathe heavily, knowing that the ordeal had come to an end. Before resuming my climb, I pulled out the lens from where I had placed it, as I still needed to use it to reach the top. Twilight floated onto my hat, snuggled in a little, and also began breathing heavily. I didn't mean to give her so much stress, but then this was part and parcel of being a hero. The next sections weren't as hectic as what I experienced earlier, and soon I found myself having finally reached the top of the mountain, only to run into something both unpleasant and saddening. A Goron was standing in front of me as I climbed onto the plateau, yet he was completely frozen, his entire body solidified in a block of ice. I had no idea how long he had been there, but I knew it had to have been some time. To his left, shivering away, was another Goron, but what really caught my attention was the unique cave entrance. Someone had decorated it with what looked like ancient Goron runes. Maud's shadow was nearby, and that told me that this was where she had been buried. Another thought struck me. Were these the two Gorons that Pinkie Pie said never went back to the village? The snow that blocked the tunnel they used to get up here now prevented them from going back down, so all they could do was stay here until they froze to death.
Hey! Is someone over there?
The Goron was either very short-sighted or couldn't see due to the wind blowing. Something about his voice sounded familiar, so I walked forward to see who it was. My suspicions were confirmed when I recognized Sandalwood. His hairstyle combined with that hat of his should have been a dead giveaway. I then turned to look at the other Goron to see if he was also someone from my world, but he resembled what I assumed was an actual Goron. He didn't have any distinguishing features.
How did you get up here without using the tunnel? I climbed up,
I answered.
Really? I don't recall ever seeing a ladder on the side of the mountain, but perhaps you have experience climbing mountains. It's been a while since my brother and I had any contact from anyone down below. We've been up here so long that it feels like we've been here forever,
Sandalwood said.
Why are you two even up here? My brother and I were tasked with an important mission from our elder. This is the grave where a Goron hero rests. She was the greatest among us and risked her life countless times to protect us from terrifying beasts who've come to inhabit these mountains, but now her life has been taken away, and during such a terrible crisis. The elder asked my brother and I to put up a memorial dedicated to the hero, but as you already know, the way back has been blocked by snow,
Sandalwood answered.
Can't you remove the snow somehow? If only I could, then I'd gladly go back home to Goron village, but without Metagoron's newly developed explosive, nothing is going to be able to remove that snow. Because of that, I'm stuck up here and slowly freezing to death. My brother has already been frozen solid from the cold, and I fear that I will soon be joining him,
Sandalwood answered.
Why don't you melt the ice? That would be an option, but there's something my brother and I did which I now regret,
Sandalwood answered. He developed a sheepish grin on his face, followed by scratching his head, indicating that I wasn't going to like what he was about to say next.
It's times like this that make me wish I had taken some of the hot spring water I found when I was digging the hero's grave.
Wait, what? There was a hot spring up here of all places? I hoped he wasn't going to say something that would make me seething mad, but judging from how he looked down at his feet instead of at me, the former had happened.
But the hot spring is now covered by the gravestone. I can't move something that big by myself.
He did say something that made me seething mad. Sandalwood then noticed my face turning red and appeared concerned about it.
Are you okay? You look like you're about to explode like a bomb. I really needed some of that hot spring water,
I said, clenching my teeth to hold back my anger.
If you can somehow move the gravestone, then feel free to help yourself so long as you have a bottle,
Sandalwood said. How was I supposed to move something big according to him? Sure, I had plenty of strength for someone my age, but nothing compared to what a Goron was capable of. Now I had to go somewhere else to find some hot spring water so that I could melt the hearth the smithies used.
I'm sorry for covering up the hot spring in the hero's grave site, but I guess this is what's meant by the Goron saying, there's no use in crying over split rocks. Nothing can be done about it now. Maybe you should have thought about that before putting the gravestone in place. Perhaps, but then the elder straight that the hero's grave had to be made as soon as possible. Gorons who aren't given a proper burial are said to come back as ghosts to haunt those who desecrated them. Still, if only I had taken some water from the hot spring beneath the great hero's grave, then I could melt the ice off of my brother,
Sandalwood said. My mind was seething with anger over what Sandalwood did, but then I quickly calmed down upon realizing that I didn't fully understand what was going on.
Do you know how the hero died? When she didn't return several days after leaving for the temple, we sent out a search party to see if we could find her. When the party discovered her lifeless corpse, it was as though the Goron's spirit died at that exact moment.
Sandalwood answered.
Maybe she fell from a high place. That's what the elder assumes happened. How certain do you think he is? Very. This may sound strange to you, but would it be okay if I take a look at the hero's grave myself? You came all the way up here for nothing else, so don't allow me to stop you from indulging in your curiosity. By the time you finally come back out, I'll probably be frozen just like my brother, so don't expect me to address you.
Sandalwood answered. I thought about saying something regarding how he had such a negative attitude, but then the cold was really bad this high up. Knowing there wasn't anywhere else for me to go, I walked past Sandalwood and turned on the lens of truth upon reaching Maud's shadow. She must have been really patient considering I talked to 2 Gorons even when she insisted on getting to her grave as soon as possible. She floated into the cave prompting me to follow her, and immediately I was astonished at what awaited me inside. The cave comprised of several crystals strewn about the floor and ceiling, and a warm breeze could be felt coming from a large monolith block located in the middle of the room. A face on top one side of the monolith displayed what I assumed was Darmani's actual face. He certainly looked relaxed and writing had been carved below it. I tried to see if I could read what it said but to no avail. Maud herself floated forward until she came to a stop in front of the monolith, so I walked over to see what she had to say. My feet became entrenched in water upon getting close, and it didn't take me long to know where the hot spring was prior to Sandalwood and his brother covering it. My magic at that point was starting to run low, making using the lens more difficult, so I put it away and almost jumped upon Maud appearing before me out of thin air. Was there a force that allowed her to finally be seen without magic?
I am sorry for making you come all the way up here,
Maud Pai said.
It was a pretty good experience given who I ran into,
I said.
Now that we have arrived at my grave, I can now introduce myself to you. I am Darmani III. The blood of proud Gorons flows through me. This feels strange for me to say, but when I was alive, I was a renowned warrior and veteran. I protected my people from danger. No challenge was too great for me to overcome,
Maud Pai said.
When you were alive? Yes. When I was alive. But alas, I am now dead,
Maud Pai answered, her mouth having dropped open and placing a hand over her eyes. It looked like she was about to cry, but then she quickly regained her composure. Perhaps the proud blood she possessed didn't allow her to display any kind of weakness?
What happened to you? It came all of a sudden. What did? Just over a week ago, a terrible snowstorm came out of nowhere and blanketed the entire region in a frozen wasteland of snow. The source of the storm came from the temple to the north of here. As the hero of my people, it fell onto me to find a solution. I was fine at that point. I was fine until I reached Snowhead Temple, my aim to destroy a demon that had been created according to rumors by a child who wore a strange mask,
Maud Pai answered. Starlight Glimmer was the cause behind the harsh weather, as Her Highness and I suspected. The only question that remained was why she wanted to cause so much pain and misery to the Gorons.
Did you meet this child? No, but I couldn't believe what the rumors were saying. I marched to the temple to destroy the demon. It had been wreaking havoc on Goron village and I was the only one who could stop it. But something I didn't expect happened that changed everything. Big Goron, largest of Gorons, had been assigned by the Elder the task of preventing anyone from gaining access to the temple, yet was nowhere to be found. I assumed he was sleeping like he usually did. When I began walking across a narrow pathway, a blizzard suddenly appeared and I couldn't avoid it. It blew me into the valley. And now, here I am,
Maud Pai answered. So that was how she died. A chance wind was what claimed her life and left her in her current condition. My heart was weeping with sadness upon hearing what had befallen her, yet I chose not to cry in case it offended her pride as a warrior. The ones who were truly sad were the Gorons who had to bury her. To them, Maud was their pillar of strength, the one who lighted their path whenever darkness came calling, but now she was lost to them, unable to do anything other than look upon in the visage of a spirit. Her reason for wanting to come back to life was starting to make sense now.
I'm sorry for your passing. I am infuriated. What will you do now? In this current state, I can only watch as Goron village is slowly buried in ice. I may have died, but I cannot rest. My spirit will linger in this perpetual existence until my mission has been fulfilled. That is where you come in. The one who rides the giant bird told me that you can use magic, so you may be able to help me return to the living. I beg you. Bring me back to life with your magic so I can save my people from dying. Please.
Maud Pie answered.
You want me to bring you back to life? Yes. I must complete my mission, otherwise I'll never be able to rest in peace.
Maud Pie answered. I could tell she was desperate to be brought back to life, but I knew that what she asked was impossible given it was a magic I couldn't use. Deep down, she knew this was true and was only trying to avoid the truth for as long as possible. I had no other choice but to tell her the truth so that she couldn't continue on with such a pointless display.
I'm so sorry, but I can't revive you. Why not? It's a magic that I don't possess, and even if I did, I don't think it would even work on you. From what I've experienced since coming to this world, when someone dies, it's permanent and nothing can change it. Look, I know you want to finish what you started, but there's nothing you can do.
I answered. I knew my answer was going to make Maud upset. It was an inevitability that couldn't be avoided, but perhaps now she was willing to accept what fate had decided to inflict upon her. She then floated around her gravestone. That was what the monolith was for a few moments before looking at the strange writing on it and turning back to face me.
Sorry if my words have hit you hard, but you needed to know the truth before it ended up destroying you, well, more than you already are. It is beyond your power? I see. Then I have one recourse. Heal my sorrows. Any way that you can do it will suffice, but please heal my sorrows. If you can heal my tormented soul, perhaps there is a way for me to finish my mission. If you have the ability to free me from this torment, then use whatever you possess. I am not going anywhere anytime soon, so I shall remain here.
Maud Pie said. I didn't know what healing her sorrow would actually do, but she appeared very adamant about it. This was yet another one of those awkward moments that involved me making a decision that resulted from being under a lot of pressure.
I think I see where she is going with this.
Twilight said, bopping me on the head to get my attention.
Really? Because I sure don't. Remember what Sonata did for you way back at the beginning of your journey? Remember when you soothed the soul of Kamuro? You used the Song of Healing to rid yourself of the cursed Starlight Caste and assured Kamuro that you would continue his legacy by teaching his song to others. If you played that song before Maud, it might be enough for her to finally move on.
Twilight said.
What if she doesn't want to? At this point, it's for the best that you fulfill her request, Sunset. So long as she remains in her current condition, she will never be able to rest.
I looked at Maud, who had since tilted her head forward to look down at the ground, and I could see the teardrops landing with soft splashes. She truly wanted to do something to save her people, and it was that display that moved me more than anything I had seen so far in Termina. Without a moment's hesitation, I took out the ocarina of time from the pouch on my belt, thought about how the Song of Healing went, and played the notes in front of her. She didn't feel anything happening to her at first, which made me think that it wasn't going to work, but then she suddenly clutched her head.
What a soothing melody! My sorrows are melting away into the song.
Maud Pie said, her body swaying back and forth. Suddenly, a bright light flashed where she was floating, and I closed my eyes to prevent myself from being blinded by how intense the light was. When I opened them several seconds later, I was in some kind of dream where everything appeared warped. In front of me stood Maud, who was floating in front of a large gathering of Gorons who appeared to be cheering her on. They must have represented the respect and love they had for her when she was alive, and that even now they still felt that way even when she was no longer with them. Maud then looked at me and nodded before raising her arms, sparkling energy radiating from her body. I didn't know what was going on, but then a second bright light flashed and I covered my eyes again. This time upon opening them, I was back in the gravesite, but Maud was nowhere to be seen. Had she finally been put to rest? I felt bad that she wasn't able to complete her mission, but it was for the best as she couldn't continue living such a tormented existence. Twilight then bopped me on the head and told me to look up at something that had appeared in front of the gravestone. I looked and saw Goron's face staring back at me before it dropped to the ground, landing with a loud clank. I walked over to where it fell and picked it up to discover that it was a mask, perhaps one that was like the Deku mask I received from Sonata.
Is this what I think it is? That's the Goron mask. The Song of Healing has healed Maud Starmani's soul and sealed it inside of this mask. If you were to put it on your face, you will transform into a slightly different version of Darmani based on your own looks. I'm guessing this is what she meant when she said that she wanted her soul healed. You've been tasked with completing her mission, Sunset, and changing into her will open up new paths that were unavailable before.
Twilight answered.
I leave my undying feelings with you.
Maud Pie said, her voice echoing from the beyond.
The deeds I accomplished while living are carved on my grave. You should read it to learn more about the power that I've left within the mask you hold. For the Goron village, I have asked your assistance.
Her voice disappeared and I held the mask firmly in my hands, knowing what was about to happen when I put it on.
Twilight, I suggest you move back as this could get ugly,
I said. Twilight nodded without saying a word and floated off to the side. What was going to happen when I don this mask and change into a Goron? Would I become a variation of Maud or a variation of Darmani? Gulping, I placed the mask on my face and immediately felt the same convulsions whenever I put on the Deku mask. It felt like I was trying to throw up as my body began to go through the process of changing into another creature, but I knew I had to go through with this. Moments later, I let out a scream that Twilight couldn't hear, the Goron mask looking like a mask of terror or something, before everything went white in a blinding flash. When I opened my eyes a few moments later, my perspective felt different, as though I had grown a few inches taller. Her Highness stared at me in bewilderment, and that told me I needed to find a reflective surface so that I could see what I looked like. I found one by simply looking at my reflection in the body of water that surrounded the grave. I looked at my reflection and held my hand to my face. I looked like an ordinary Goron aside from the green hat and my own hairstyle, along with the color that would most likely be seen as a distinguishing feature. When I noticed the rest of my body, my immediate reaction was to place my gloved hands across my chest. I was wearing a bra with metallic pieces covering up my private parts, green shorts, and thick boots. Once I got over the initial shock, I swung my arms around to see what kind of power they possessed before slamming them down onto the ground. The impact they left was simply remarkable. Gorons were physically strong, but I never knew just how much it was true until now. I then looked at my chest and remembered that Diamond Tiara wore a breastplate that covered up her breasts, yet all I had was a bra that didn't look right given this body featured a plump stomach. I'd say she fared better than I did in terms of armor.
Are you okay, Sunset? I feel so strange in this form. That's to be expected given you've never been a Goron before. I noticed you were surprised by your lack of clothing, but you should know that most Gorons don't wear that much.
Twilight said.
How am I supposed to move around with such a bloated belly? Maybe you should heed what Maud said before her voice faded away.
Twilight answered. Just before she left, Maud mentioned something about leaving behind her deeds that were written down on the base of her grave. I turned to look at the words and was surprised to see that I could now read them. As a Goron, I could now understand their written language like it were natural. I began to read what had been written down so that I could figure out how this body worked.
The Goron hero, Darmani III, rests here. In honor of a great hero, this memorial is inscribed with the knowledge of a great hero. Oh, chosen Goron hero! Your power to lift objects without effort is mightier than the strength of any other. And your heart is strong, too, as it is filled with compassion that is kinder than any other. Goron heroes have the ability to curl up and roll wherever it is they need to go. The faster you roll, the better, as you shall reach speeds other creatures can only dream of. Gorons who possess magic can produce spikes from their bodies that can mow down enemies as though they were nothing. In the thickest snow, a Goron's roll will be quick and allow easy access to spikes. Water is the one thing a Goron hero must avoid at all costs. They sink like stones should they fall into water, so beware if you find yourself surrounded by water. Goron heroes can punch their enemies into oblivion with the climax being a hero's body, for it is a weapon like a blade to a human. If a Goron hero curls up and leaps into the air, they will come crashing down with a mighty quake that can flatten all who oppose them. I think I got all of that. Well, if you ever forget anything, I'll be sure to remind you of what you can do. Thanks, Twilight. Knowledge is something I strive for whenever I have a free moment, Sunset, and remembering how Gorons operate should be a simple enough task. Now, you need to find a way to access the hot spring water that resides underneath this gravestone. You need some to not only help Fancy Pants and Tire Wreck get their business up and running, but to help Sandalwood free his brother from his icy prison.
Twilight said.
I wonder if I can pick up the gravestone. With those muscles, I'm sure you can pick up just about anything, but I wouldn't do that in this case. Maud Pie may no longer be here, but to vandalize her grave by lifting up the stone dedicated to her memory would be just plain cruel. Maybe you could push it aside or something.
Twilight answered. That wasn't a bad idea. I walked around to the back of the gravestone. The front would have been disrespectful, grabbed it with both hands, and began to pull it back with ease. The gravestone felt like it weighed nothing at all, but I contributed it to my incredible strength as a Goron. If I had tried pulling as myself, I'd have probably strained something. Once I pulled it far enough, water began seeping out from a hole in the ground, and I knew what needed to be done next. I took out the empty bottle from behind my back, still couldn't explain how it happens, and scooped up some hot spring water before corking it. Unlike regular water, it felt warm to the touch, and part of me was strongly considering taking a swig of it just because. One thing that was pleasant was how my body felt relieved just from standing knee-deep, but I couldn't stay here all day as I had plenty of things to take care of.
Okay, I got some hot spring water. You'll need to be careful with this stuff, Sunset. If you take too long in trying to deliver it, the water will cool down and become ordinary spring water again. You'll have to climb all the way back up here if you want to refill your bottle with more. Frankly, it would be so much easier if you had more than one bottle, but I suppose this will have to do for now. Anyway, there's no reason to stick around, so let's see if Sandalwood's brother can be thawed out from his frozen prison.
Twilight said. Deciding that holding the bottle in my hand was the smart thing to do, I began to walk forward and quickly realized that Gorons weren't very good at walking about. It probably had to do with their bulky bodies being hard to utilize without rolling. Upon walking outside of the cave, I could see Sandalwood still shivering, so at the very least he hadn't succumbed like his brother. I had no idea how he would react upon seeing another Goron, but I was about to in just a few moments.
You're back already? I guess you didn't find it all that appealing, but then non-Gorons wouldn't understand.
Sandalwood said. Upon seeing that he was staring at a Goron with red and yellow streaked hair, he performed a double take before lurching forward to get a better look.
Hey? What happened to that human girl who came by earlier? How did you manage to get up here, what with the tunnel blocked off by snow?
He then stepped back and began freaking out when he realized who I was supposed to be.
Why you're... No. This is impossible. My eyes must be playing tricks on me. You're not the Great Darmani, are you? I am.
I answered boldly.
Yes, you do look exactly like her, but if you are the Great Darmani, then... Whose grave had I been asked to make?
Sandalwood asked. Did he just say that I resembled Maud right down to the very last detail? I saw what I looked like by looking at my reflection, and I don't see how he could have made such an obvious blunder. Then again, perhaps this was another facet this game had where characters were oblivious.
Did you come back to life because it was so warm beneath your grave? You can thank the hot spring that was there before I placed that grave marker as per the elder's instructions, but now I regret covering it up. If I had some hot spring water, I could thaw out my brother. I have some hot spring water in my bottle. You do? Oh. My brother will be saved. The Great Darmani has pulled through once again.
Sandalwood shouted. I thought about rolling my eyes over his behavior, but I shrugged my shoulders, walked over to where Sandalwood's brother was, uncorked my bottle, and poured the hot spring water near the base of the ice. In an instant, the ice melted away and the now unfrozen Goron took a few moments to regain his composure.
Hey? What have I been doing? I remember getting cold due to the snow, but then I blacked out. You were frozen in a block of ice, brother, but the Great Darmani saved you.
Sandalwood said.
The Great Darmani? What's with you? Are you half asleep? I can't believe you just said that.
The other Goron then turned to face me, unaware of who he was talking to, but it would sink in within a few moments.
Did you hear what my brother said? He claims that Darmani saved my life by thawing me free of the ice. The Great Darmani died long ago when she chose to go to Snowhead Temple in order to put an end to the cause that affects this region. Right now, she's lying in her grave, may she rest in peace and...
It finally sunk in for him and his reaction spoke for itself. The Goron took a few steps back, rubbed his eyes, and stared longingly at what he was speaking to.
Darmani. You're alive. I was shocked, too, but somehow, it seems the Great Darmani isn't dead. I don't know how this is even possible, but here you are amongst the living once again. Really? There's no need to pretend that we're having a dream, brother, as we're both wide awake now and she stands before us. Since you have returned from the dead, allow me to say welcome back, Great Darmani. With this, a star of hope appears in Goron village where it had previously been snuffed out. Great Darmani. Please do something about the blizzard blowing in from Snowhead. If you can figure out what's going on at the temple, our people shall be saved from death.
Sandalwood answered.
I've every intention of saving my people.
I said, making sure to use the word my as opposed to your.
Then you must return to Goron village and speak to the elder. He will tell you what's been going on since your false death.
Sandalwood said. What he said had now become another problem that involved making a difficult decision. Sandalwood and his brother didn't know that the Goron elder left the village in order to finish what Maud started, so going to the village to speak with him was out of the question unless one of the other Gorons had some ideas. I felt compelled to check up on the Gorons given I was now living the life of their great hero, but part of me wanted to see about helping Fancy Pants' entire wreck. I didn't want to have to climb up that ladder again after helping them to acquire some more hot spring water, so unless there was another spring somewhere down below, I was going to be hard-pressed in figuring out a solution. End of chapter.